everyone. My name is Dr. Kirsi Cobb, and I am a lecturer in biblical studies at Cliff College. And today I will be talking about my favorite all-time topic, which is women in the Bible. This is what I love to teach about, I love to preach about, I love to research. It is a topic that absolutely fascinates me. There are so many strong and significant female characters in the Bible, and even those characters that are mistreated or we don't even hear that much about, oftentimes there is a story there that it is really worth looking at and discovering what the Bible actually wants to tell us about these women. And my fascination with the female characters in the Bible started at a fairly early stage. I remember doing my undergraduate degree and looking at Deborah. I remember going to my 1 Corinthians class and listening to my a lecturer talk about if women should still be wearing hats in church. I heard about all of this and I found it all extremely interesting. Sometimes tricky, sometimes quite puzzling, but always extremely interesting as well as challenging. And this love for women in the Bible has lasted for a very long time, and that is what I still love to do now. Now today, we will be looking at two of my all-time favorite female characters from the Old Testament. However, before we go there, I would like to let you know about a new initiative that has started here at Cliff College, together with the University of Manchester. And you may have already heard about it. It is called the BGC. So I'll just minimize my screen so you can see the screen here. Here we go. So, the BGC, this stands for the Bible, Gender and Church Research Center. And you might be wondering what on earth this center is about. Well, this center has a bit of a story behind it. And the story behind it goes something like this. Throughout my life, at the very latest since I entered theological education, as I said, I've been puzzled and fascinated by stories about women in the Bible. But I have also come across that there's quite a bit of a discrepancy between what academics are saying is going on with the women in the Bible and what the real lived experiences of women who are in churches or other Christian communities are, what these lives are actually like, and those two elements don't often meet. So I can be going to academic conferences, hearing about new brilliant interpretations, or how a particular Hebrew word means this, or how this woman was important, or how we could read about this character in this way. But by the time I would get into a church, a lot of people wouldn't have heard of these things. What would often happen is that it would be either things like tradition or kind of biblical exegesis that was established several generations ago that would be holding sway and that would be dictating what women were able to do in church. And not always, but a lot of the time, this would mean that women in certain contexts couldn't preach, they couldn't teach, they couldn't be elders, or their lives were otherwise limited. And what I also then discovered is that when I would then leave the church context and go back into the world of academia, a lot of the voices of the women who would be experiencing these things and living out these truths, or at least what they felt like was the truth, in their own lives, these voices weren't being heard in the academia. So a classic example of this would be passages in the Bible where some sort of act of violence or, for example, a rape is committed on a woman. And in academic circles, there could be mountains of research done about this. But that mountain of research wouldn't necessarily include the voices of women who had actually experienced this. And on the other side, in churches, there would be a lot of women who had experienced such things, but some of them felt unsupported, felt they couldn't talk to anyone about it, and the voices of these women were, not always, but sometimes being silenced, and the two worlds of academia and practice just didn't often meet. So my dream was to bring these two strands together, hence the title Bible, Gender and Church. It was to bring the academic element together with the lives of those, and those of us, in fact, I'm one of them, who live and breathe these scriptures in their daily lives. I really want to bring practitioners, their voices, their experiences, together with the academics and see what kind of change could we effect, what kind of projects could we dream up together so that we could start to bridge the gap between these two worlds. And that is what the BGC is really all about. As I said earlier, the inaugural lecture for this particular research center took place in May of last year. That was during the festival, in fact. And during the inaugural lecture, we had Reverend Dr. Susan Shooter, and she actually came to talk about a topic that does bridge some of this gap. She had researched the faith experiences of those who had survived abuse, and all of the participants were, in this case, women. And it was an absolutely fascinating lecture, and on our website, you can see the website address on the screen. You can go there and you can find the lecture there. You can look at that, and you can then see also my and Dr. Holly Morse's responses to her paper. And Dr. Holly Morse, if I might just add here, she's an absolutely brilliant scholar residing in the University of Manchester. So she is the co-founder with myself when it comes to this particular center. And she has literally just published a book on Eve. She did her PhD work on Eve. So feel free to go to the University of Manchester's website, find Dr. Holly Morse, and go and get her book. I am sure it is going to be brilliant. So, the Bible, Gender and Church Research Center, we did have all sorts of plans in place that actually should have started right about now. To celebrate our 1-year launch, we were going to do a Women in the Bible weekend, where both Holly and myself would have given quite a lot of teaching. However, because of the COVID-19 situation, that, of course, had to be cancelled. But watch this space. We are hoping to run that again at some point next year when the circumstances surrounding the pandemic become a little clearer. We are also hoping to run 1 or 2 events regarding reading oppressive or biblical passages with at least seemingly abusive content in the Bible. We are running those events around the theme of abusing God, reading the Bible in the Me Too age. And the idea there is to bring both academics and practitioners together and look at how we can create resources and reflections on how those passages in the Bible, for example, some of the rape narratives, how could these be read with the survivor's needs in mind, rather than just do it academically or just do it based on the voice from the ground up. Rather, how can we bring the academics and the survivors together and read these passages with the survivors' needs in mind? So again, watch this space for updates on that. And if you want to keep more informed about what's happening at the BGC, feel free to email me at the email address that is right at the bottom of the screen, bgc@cliffcollege.ac.uk. If you email me there, I can add you to our mailing list, and then you will be getting updates as to when events are taking place. If you want, you can join that, or you can just keep an eye out on the BGC website and see as updates turn up and go from there. Okay, now that is enough about the BGC. We are now going to spend the rest of this session looking at 2 of my, as I said, all-time favorite female characters in the Old Testament. And these would be Miriam and Pharaoh's daughter. Now, some of you might never have heard of Miriam, so let's do a little test. Do you know who Moses is? Usually, all my students go, yay, we know who Moses is. He is the great liberator who was an Israelite, was raised up in Pharaoh's court, and then he kills someone and has to run away, and then God calls him, and he goes and, with lots of signs and wonders, then liberates Egypt. No, we're not liberating Egypt. Israelites from Egypt. And all these stories about the plagues and everything else, you can find all those in the book of Exodus, and we have the parting of the Red Sea and all of these sorts of wonderful stories. So we've all heard of that. But what about Miriam? Well, Miriam turns up right at the start of the book of Exodus. And right at the start, we hear of a Pharaoh who comes to power, and this particular Pharaoh doesn't know about Joseph. He doesn't know about all the good that Joseph did in the land of Egypt, like saving them all from famine. And he starts to get a little paranoid that the Israelites are getting too numerous. So basically, to cut a long story short, he decides to make them his own private slave labor army, so to speak. So off they go to work, and however, they are still prospering. So another long story short, his solution to this is then to throw all the Hebrew baby boys into the Nile. And at this point, we have Moses' mother entering the story at the start of Exodus 2. Moses' mother gives birth to Moses, but when she can't hide the baby anymore, she makes a basket and sets this among the reeds in the Nile. Now, a little snippet of information there. Did you know that the word for basket that is being used in Exodus 2 is actually the same word as the word for the ark in the story of Noah and the ark in the book of Genesis? So what is happening, and what I find just astounding here, is that by linking with this tiny little word the actions of Moses' mother with the ark, the author might be telling us that, well, actually, God is creating something new here. Like he saved Noah and his family from the flood in the ark and kind of restarted humanity, so to speak. What we get with Moses in the ark is that God is again beginning something new. He is beginning an act of deliverance amidst a huge crisis in the lives of the Israelites, and he is doing something to save. And to me, it is absolutely just astounding that it is only these two occurrences, these two stories, the Noah's Ark and the Ark that Moses was in, where this word ark is used in this sort of way. So that somehow in the actions of Moses' mother already, we get an indication that God's on the move. He's about to save just by this one woman making a basket. That's just amazing. And after that, once she has made this ark and put it in the Nile, we read this verse. His sister, so Moses' sister, whom we will assume in this session is Miriam, stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Now, a lot of people, as I said, haven't heard of Miriam. They would have heard about her brother, Moses, but they haven't heard of Miriam. Now, may I just suggest here, had there been no Moses' mother, she obviously wouldn't have given birth to Moses. So without the mother, there would be no Moses. Obviously, without the father, there would be no Moses either, but I'm focusing on the women today. So bear with me. Now, hadn't Moses' mother then tried to save her son by putting Moses in the ark, there would have been no Moses. But had there been no Miriam to stand watch and later in the story go to Pharaoh's daughter and make a completely outrageous suggestion that Miriam should actually go and get a wet nurse for Pharaoh's daughter, there would have been, again, no Moses. So it is in the hands of these women that the salvation of the entire nation is hanging in the balance. And here we have Miriam, who is basically kind of a young woman here. So she might have even been a teenager. So we have this teenager in whose hands a lot of the whole fate of the Israelite nation is hanging. And that, for me, is just amazing. Now, a couple of things to note about this particular passage is, first of all, in this passage, the word for standing, so his sister Miriam stood. This particular phrase is the Hebrew verb yatav, which means to stand firm. And what is interesting about this one particular phrase is that in the book of Exodus, it's only ever used here of Miriam. And then in Exodus 14:13, where the Israelites are by the Red Sea, they've got the Red Sea in front of them, the Pharaoh and his chariots behind them, and they are basically panicking and crying out of, we are all going to die. At which point Moses tells them to stand firm. You know, they are to stand firm and they will see the salvation that God is going to effect for them that day. And what is so fascinating is that in that occasion, the standing firm is not an instruction to stop running around. Standing firm seems to indicate that if you do this, you will in fact see God's salvation. And elsewhere in the Hebrew Bible, when this particular verb is used, it seems to have a bit of a divine element about it. So either God is standing, or some divine elected leader is standing before God. There seems to be this idea that when you stand firm, it's more than just don't move. There's an element of faith and expectation rising. You are about to see something of God before you. A work of God is about to happen. So when we think of Miriam, we shouldn't just think of her as, oh, here is this teenager probably panicking her head out and watching in the reeds what is going to happen to her brother. But rather, she's standing firm. This is a woman of faith. She is there expecting God to show up. Now, that requires guts. I mean, let's think about this. A lot of Israelite baby boys would be dead at that point. And they are slaves. They have been slaves for hundreds of years. So what possible reason could there be for Miriam to expect God to do anything? Yet she is. She's got that nevertheless faith that says, you know what? I'm stationing myself right here and I am going to wait for God to act. I am expecting God to act. And even more, this is just brilliant. In the Hebrew, in verse 4, when it says that his sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him, to Moses, the original Hebrew actually doesn't say to see, it says to know. So his sister stood at a distance to know what would happen to him. Now, in the English translations, this particular kind of change in vocabulary doesn't necessarily make that big a difference. But in the Hebrew version of Exodus, it actually does. Because yada, to know, is a very, very big deal in the book of Exodus. In the Exodus story, God is doing a lot of stuff so that Moses might know, or the Israelites might know, or the Egyptians might know, or Pharaoh might know that God is in fact God. This is why a lot of this is taking place. And what is interesting is that this verb is only used in the sense of somebody actually knows something, only of two persons, shall I say. One is Miriam here. She is waiting to see, to know, what would happen to Moses. And the other time is about God. So this is Exodus 2:25. It says earlier in verse 24 that God had heard the groaning of the Israelites coming to him, and then he remembers his covenant with Israel's forefathers, and then it says in verse 25, so God looked on the Israelites and was concerned about them. That is what my English version says. In the Hebrew it actually says, so God looked on the Israelites and he knew. Now, what did God know? Well, I guess we'll find out one day when we get to heaven. But from the text, what happens next is the episode of Moses and the burning bush. And why that is so absolutely fascinating is to do with the fact that when someone actually acknowledges something or knows something in the Bible here, in the Exodus story, what happens next is that God acts and does something. What we get in Exodus 2 is that the second when God knows, he acts. He goes into salvation mode. And so when we see Miriam here, and she's standing firm in faith to know what would happen to her brother, there seems to be this indication yet again that Miriam is taking a stance of faith. She is expecting not just for God to act, but she is expecting that God is going to act in a way that is going to deliver her brother. There's going to be an act of salvation. Something is going to take place here. And that is just absolutely mind-boggling and amazing. Now, the second female character that I would like to introduce you to is the next lady who enters the scene. And this is the lady I call the princess, in other words, Pharaoh's daughter. And it says in verse 5 that then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. Now, at the surface, this might seem like, and what is there to say? There's a high-ranking Egyptian woman who comes to have a bath, and whoop-de-doo, she sees a basket. But what is interesting here is that, yes, not much is taking place here, but in the word choices of the author, I dare to claim that he has, I assume he, might have been a she, has chosen the words and the vocabulary he is using in a way that gives us an indication that God is on the move. God is doing something here. Either he's working through these women, or he's observing the women doing what they are doing, and God's plan is just coming to take place all the same. But something of God is happening here. And the first word that I want to look at is the verb yarad, to come down. Pharaoh's daughter went down. Now, why this is important is that went down can be an indication of God's movement in history. So in the book of Genesis, for example, when people are building Tower of Babel, God comes down to take a bit of a peek as to what they are doing. In Exodus 3 and 8, God says here, I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians. So we have this indication that in this coming down, Pharaoh's daughter is already giving us an indication of what God will do with the whole nation. Then we have this idea of to see. She saw the basket. Now, in this verse I've already read out to you in Exodus 2 and 25, it says here that God looked on the Israelites and he knew. The verb look on there is the Hebrew verb ra'ah, to see. So God is seeing the suffering. He's about to come and to deliver, seeing the other, seeing the person who is in pain, seeing the suffering is very important theme here in the Exodus. Then she sends her maid to get the basket, shalach, to send. Later on, God will send Moses to go and rescue the Israelites. There is sending taking place. Like Pharaoh's daughter is sending the maid, God will send Moses. And in fact, this other verb, go, lakach, we also have here later on. Miriam will come to Pharaoh's daughter and say, shall I go and fetch a wet nurse? And Pharaoh's daughter is like, go and do this. And in a similar sort of fashion, God will tell Moses later on to go and rescue the Israelites. Now, why this is so amazing is the fact that Pharaoh's daughter is a daughter of the enemy. Like, she's the daughter of the Pharaoh who put this entire plan in place to murder the Israelites and to enslave them. And yet, she's the one who gets to give us a glimpse through her actions what God will do later on. She will come down. God will come down. She sees. God sees, she will send, God will send. She will come on going and God will come on going. It's like there is this mirroring effect going on that somehow in the everyday workings out of these women, the work of God is taking place without any choirs of dancing angels. God is just working through these women. And this entire thing then beautifully culminates in the fact that Miriam will then ask Pharaoh's daughter, oh, would you like me to go and get a wet nurse? And this idea of getting a wet nurse is outrageous, because in that day and age, getting a wet nurse was part and parcel of the adoption process or of an infant. So what we get here is that Miriam basically jumps directly to the phase in the proceedings of, rather than asking the daughter, oh, will you keep this baby? She's like, of course you're gonna keep it. Shall I get a wet nurse now? Sort of thing. It's absolutely outrageous, and yet it works. So somehow, through the ingenuity and care of these women, God is on the move without ever like directly doing anything. And that to me is one of the biggest messages regarding the women of the Bible, is the fact that even though they don't appear that many times in the Bible, some of them are so powerful, and always there is a message to discover. And I hope that when you go away from this session and when you next meet women in your reading of the Bible, just pause for a moment and have a little think. What is God talking to you through these women? Because some of their stories are just amazing. So thank you for staying with me in this session. Again, as I said earlier, if you want to be part of our BGC mailing list, just email the email address I gave you earlier. And I hope to see you again soon. Bye!